Um, Good morning. Thank you all for being here today. My name is Ben Eldridge. I'm the Executive Director of the Heart of Texas Conservancy. I'm joined here today by Rachel Haynes, the Policy Manager from the Greater Edwards Aquifer Alliance, as well as Kel Hoffman, the Land Conservation Director for the Cibolo Center for Conservation. We really represent more than just our organizations. We are on calls and in meetings all the time with other organizations who very much align with what we're going to share with you today. We are reeling from the tragedy of the Independence Day flood in Kerr County. Many are still missing, the searches are ongoing, and the death toll continues to rise. First responders and neighbors have bravely risked their lives to save others who were caught in this flood. And now many people are searching for those who could not be saved. There is no way to account for the anguish that we feel for the lives that have been lost, but we know that this must never happen again. Our conservation and natural resource organizations, as well as many others throughout the state, are not content to sit by and allow a tragedy of this proportion to ever happen again. The Texas Hill Country is known as Flash Flood Alley, a name that captures the frequent occurrence of flash flood events in this region. The location, elevation, geology, and steep slopes of the region contribute to intense rain events that concentrate flash floods like the ones we have just witnessed. Some have said that nobody could have seen this coming. However, the probability of a flood event of this magnitude in Flash Flood Alley has been known for years. The probability is reflected on flood maps that illustrate the likelihood of a 100-year flood or 500-year flood event, as well as numerous historical events demonstrating the death and destruction caused by these floods. The Guadalupe River alone has seen 6 deadly flood events since 1921, not including the recent Independence Day flood. In 1921, a flood drowned 12 people, and an additional 25 were unaccounted for in New Braunfels, including an entire families that were reportedly washed away. In 1932, the Guadalupe River flooded in Hunt and Kerrville, killing 7 people. In 1972, there were 18 people who died due to flooding in the Guadalupe River basin. The 1987 flash flooding resulted in 10 deaths when a bus carrying children was swept away near Comfort, Texas, where we are here today. Another flood in 1998 spanned 7 river basins and caused 31 deaths. A 2002 event spilled over the Canyon Lake Dam and was responsible for 12 fatalities. We are still waiting and mourning as the count from the Independence Day flood continues to grow. If we don't learn the lessons of this terrible tragedy, we will doom ourselves to repeat this history and lose more loved ones. There are many strategies available to mitigate the severity of floods, and we're certainly agreeing with calls for early warning systems. However, the surest way of protecting human lives is to keep residential and commercial lodging out of the 100-year floodplain. To be clear, early warning systems can play a vital role. However, they are far less effective than keeping people out of harm's way in the first place. As Dick Eastland, the recently deceased owner of Camp Mystic, explained in a 1990 interview with the Austin American-Statesman, quote, "I'm sure there will be other drownings. People don't heed warnings." We must therefore use every strategy available to protect people from rebuilding or locating residences and lodging within the 100-year floodplains throughout the Texas Hill Country. Keeping lodging out of the floodplain and out of harm's way is the surest way to reduce the death and destruction caused by flood events. Safeguarding people in this matter will also protect first responders, who put their own lives at risk to aid others who are caught in flash floods. Keeping people out of the 100-year floodplain will also afford more time for people to react to emergency response systems during more extreme events that could reach up to the 500-year floodplain. Our simple message is this: going forward, we must build back better, safer, and with a focus on keeping people out of the 100-year floodplain and therefore out of harm's way. We can't stop flooding, but we can reduce the risk from flood events, and we must act before the next flood. And I'm going to invite Rachel Haynes to come up to the podium. She's with the Edwards Aquifer Alliance to say her part.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Rachel Haynes. I'm the Policy Director with the Greater Edwards Aquifer Alliance. We are a nonprofit dedicated to the protection and preservation of the Edwards and Trinity aquifers and to the protection and health and safety and welfare of all of those who rely on our groundwater resources. Our hearts go out to the many victims of the July 4th floods, their families, their communities, and the first responders. Our thoughts are with them as we work to ensure that a tragedy of this scale is not repeated. We have been advocating for responsible flood solutions that both protect Texans and respect nature for many years, and will continue to do so in an effort to ensure that Texans do not have to endure a similar disaster as we saw earlier this month. Texans deserve better. As we head into a special session partially dedicated to responding to and preparing for flood events, and as we look forward to the next legislative session in 2027, we plan on continuing to advocate for reforms to local authority relating to flooding and floodplains, and for many more flood infrastructure funding opportunities. We hope that city, county, and especially state officials will work with us to pass legislation that emphasizes preventing the worst impacts of flooding, not just response and mitigation. We will be pouring our efforts into providing research, outreach, education, and recommendations to ensure that our water supplies, the Hill Country, and Texans are adequately protected from the worst impacts of flooding. We do applaud the legislature for taking up much-needed charges to ensure that when a disaster happens, Texans are made aware and are able to respond. We look forward to seeing our state lawmakers step up. It's what Texans do best. We help each other. We believe, however, that we cannot keep simply responding to events and dealing with the impacts as they occur. We need to prevent the worst of the impacts from occurring in the first place and prepare communities for them when they do happen. Floods will continue to happen, and we will likely see floods to this scale again. We can all ensure that the next time it happens, Texans do not suffer a similar tragedy. We hope that lawmakers can join us in advocating for reforms that allow counties greater land use authority for development in the floodplains and in hydrologically sensitive areas to protect their residents. We hope to see greater solutions for open space and floodplain preservation, and we hope to see the recommendations in the Guadalupe River Regional Flood Plan and the State Flood Plan fully implemented and fully funded. We also would like to encourage all Texans to vote for Prop 4 in the November general election to provide funding for Texas water infrastructure, including funds for the Flood Infrastructure Fund that can hopefully ensure that a tragedy to this scale never happens again. Thank you, and I will now turn it over to Kel Hoffman. Thank you.
Howdy, y'all. My name is Kel Hoffman. I'm the Director of Land Conservation at the Cibolo Center for Conservation. I'll keep this brief because my colleagues have said most of the pertinent things that you need to hear. What I want to talk about, though, is how we're going to move forward. Coming in today, driving over the Guad, you see sawyers out there processing trees still, search and rescue teams looking for folks still. Those people are out there showing care for their neighbors, showing love. That same love we can use and harness to prevent something like this from happening again in the future. The time to come together and plan for this is not right after the next flood, it's right now. This will happen again. This is Flash Flood Alley, has been said. This is the 7th occurrence of a fatal flood in the last 100 years. It's not a matter of if, but simply when. And we need to be able to protect the most vulnerable people in our communities. And we can do that by banding together now, remembering how much we care for our neighbors and preventing some of these things from happening. I'd like to ask everybody to talk to their state legislators before this special session begins this month and tell them your concerns. Tell them about how this has affected you and your loved ones and get the point across. This can be prevented. We can care for the land and care for each other. Those two things go hand in hand. We just have to start now. Thank you.
And if anybody has any questions, we're happy to entertain those questions now. If anybody's got anything that they want to ask. Yeah, go ahead.
What would you say to anyone who's currently residing in the floodplains right now? Maybe they're working on rebuilding, their house maybe got flooded, deciding, should I rebuild, should I move out? What would you say to some of the people who are already
Well,
in that situation?
that's a really tough situation, right? Because people become very emotionally attached to where they live. They're very comfortable there. It's home. And so it's very challenging to say, hey, you got to get out, right? And, I think in their case, if they're not inclined to sort of heed the caution that they can take away from this tragedy, then they at least need to have a strategy to get out of their house very quickly, go bags, etc. And certainly early warning systems, monitor the weather like a hawk, and really watch for those sort of surprise scenarios, honestly. Alert systems from phone apps could be utilized. So yes, there are still going to be people that are going to remain in the 100-year floodplain, and they need to be hyper vigilant. The other thing I think we need to be careful though about is we maybe have young children in that scenario, and we may have elderly folks in those scenarios. And protecting them becomes very challenging when the flood is rising, when maybe the hearing is not the best or dementia has set in. And there needs to be some real consideration about the well-being of those innocents who may not be making as conscious a choice in that scenario. Yes.
I just to say for residents who do live in the floodplain, of course, like Ben said, we're not in the position to tell people where they should be living, but Texans can figure out a much more detailed level of their flood risk. Texas Water Development Board has a resource that's teamed up with FEMA, but I think it is on the Texas Water Development Board's website. It's their base level elevation maps. You can go to that website, you can click on your property, and it'll tell you the likely height of the floodwaters in the 100-year floods, in the 500-year floods, so that you have a better understanding of your risk, and then all of the things that Ben said to prepare once you have that understanding. I believe an organization called First Street also has where you can type in your address and figure out your risk, and just being better informed of what that worst impact scenario could be is a great way to save lives.
Any other questions? Oh, okay, we'll go here.
What are some of the obstacles in getting some of those changes become a reality in the past?
So one of the obstacles is that people do love their property and the place that they have lived. And oftentimes there's a impulse to rebuild there. And of course, part of that is because that's where they've always lived. Part of that is because there's a quality of life living close to the river, and they just happen to make it out this time. And so the obstacle is, how do we incentivize people to voluntarily move out of the 100-year floodplain? That's a very big obstacle. And I think one of the solutions could be to incentivize the creation of essentially no development zones along the river, to essentially purchase a no development zone along the river and buy those people out of redeveloping there, give them resources so that they can afford to maybe purchase land or build away from that site that they had become so dedicated to. So we need to incentivize not developing in that 100-year floodplain or redeveloping in that 100-year floodplain. That's a huge challenge. The other thing is certainly for leadership to really get real, that we need to take 100-year floodplains seriously. And actually even more than that, and do what they can to buffer and keep people away from a possible flood event. That means they have to enforce their existing rules. And I see that there's a real tendency to want to make allowances for people that are our friends and neighbors and perhaps colleagues, maybe family members that have been in this region for a long time, that names that are well recognized throughout the region. And that we tend to say, well, we should make an allowance for them. It's their private property right. Well, the sad part of that is that, again, these people are making decisions that can affect youth or elderly who have no idea and played no role in making the decision to put themselves into harm's way. And so we need to be more conscious about that. And sometimes tough love is love. And that's truly what we're here to represent, is the heart of the matter, which is to save lives, and especially to save those innocent lives that are not choosing to put themselves into harm's way.
I could maybe speak further.
Well, Rachel.
Yeah. So I think getting to the challenge in getting legislation passed, like we were talking about, of greater county authority for land use and floodplain preservation in the floodplains and hydrologically sensitive areas, is that Texas is a private property rights state, and we recognize that, and that's part of what draws people to Texas. That's part of our ethos. But I think, like Ben mentioned in his remarks and Kel mentioned in his, is having people who have been impacted by these floods talk to your legislators, talk to your city officials, your county officials, your state officials, tell them how these impact you. And it is a tricky line to draw between the protection of private property rights and the protection and prevention of these flooding impacts. But I think it's one that legislators are understanding needs to be drawn. I think there is, we've seen over the past couple of legislative sessions, a little bit more recognition that this is the case, that maybe we need a little bit more land use authority in these sensitive and risky areas. And I think that going into this session and the next session, if lawmakers hear from their constituents that this is something important to them, we'll see a lot more movement.
I also think another obstacle to changing things is it's just human nature. The intensity of this event right now is high and everybody feels it, but the world's busy. It's going to move on for everyone that doesn't live here in this area and wasn't affected, and there's going to be a new problem tomorrow that needs to get solved. What we need to do now is operationalize those changes so that when the emotion fades away, we still have concrete things that we're moving towards to prevent this from happening next time. So really harnessing the energy of the moment and talking to the people that represent you at all levels, county, local, state, and letting them know how this has affected you and what you want to see changed. That's that's a big part of this too.
For sure. So the question.
Two parts actually. How do your recommendations differ from what's already in place, and why haven't they been adopted sooner?
So there are flood protection zones have been designated by the county. There are areas where the county, according to its rules, is saying we're not going to develop in the 100-year floodplain. However, there are also, in many instances, in many counties, there's a tendency to want to provide variances to allow people to do whatever they want. That basically allows them to operate outside of those rules that are meant to apply to the whole community and to keep everybody safe. So that's one thing that is already in place but needs to be enforced. We must enforce the existing rules. Now, the other thing too is about creating some buffers, meaning allowing the counties to ensure that people aren't developing just right up to the 100-year floodplain, because that floodplain does change. Not only does the course of the river change, but FEMA has recently updated their maps with the Atlas 14 data that shows that these floodplains are oftentimes expanding. And so we need to buffer and consider the future. There are also many predictions and certainly data that supports that we are seeing more extreme rain events as time goes by. And so we need to be planful of the future, mindful of the future. And remember, it's not just about us, it is about future people who move into these properties and future generations who move into the region. Let's think holistically, let's have heart for everybody, but let's have heart that extends even to the point of making sure that nobody is inadvertently being put in harm's way outside of their awareness. And I couldn't remember part 2 of your question.
And why haven't these policies been adopted sooner? Your recommendations sooner? With 6 deadly floods since 1921.
Well, I cannot say for sure what the answer to your question is. He's asking, why haven't these policies been adopted sooner? I do think that there's a reticence to regulate, and I certainly understand that reticence. I do think we need to be cautious about overly regulating. At the same time, there are certain rules that we need to allow for that protect lives. We did that with seat belts. We've done that with airbags and other requirements for vehicles to be safer, and we've seen it save lives. So This is the same situation here. When you see a disaster of this scale and you realize that really this whole region is vulnerable to a similar disaster, we need to take every action that we can to prevent lives from being harmed and to keep people fundamentally out of harm's way. And that's a hard decision to make for policymakers, but in our view, it's a necessary one at this time.
And would you say to state officials that in places like the Hill Country that are fast and growing with development, like New Braunfels, for example, the fastest growing city in the U.S., a lot of people are moving there. It's a flood zone area as well. What do you say to cities like that, city officials, state leaders, when they're combating long-term flood risk and also fast-growing developments in cities like New Braunfels?
So this question about development and what should local leaders do going forward. First of all, I'm a big fan of strategic plans, county strategic plans. I think we need to be thinking about where development is most appropriate and where it is going to be more harmful to the landscape and the watershed and the basins. But it's also how we develop. The way that we design our roadways, for example. You know, when you put in a road, you often are also having to account for drainage. And that drainage can be gently sloped so that water has more time to slow down and sink in rather than rapidly running off to the nearest stream. We can also build with a flood management infrastructure, stormwater management infrastructure that is spread across watersheds. So we're not just thinking about just detention ponds, but really everywhere where water is falling, we want to be capturing it and sinking it into the ground. That will do two things. It will reduce the impact of these floods, and it will also benefit groundwater recharge. And if you all hadn't noticed, we're technically still in a groundwater drought, right? Yes, we got a lot of rain, but it's going to take quite some time to recover, and we need to do everything we can in the landscape to capture that water, slow it down, sink it in, and let it migrate down into the aquifers, or even just feed the base flow of our streams, which will then go into the recharge zones and recharge our aquifers. Slow it down, sink it in. Let's make use of this water and reduce the harm of it. Rachel, did you have something?
I'll get to you next. So I would just say that Ben answered most of it and it was wonderful. I think one of the reasons that these rules have not been, that do exist, the regulations that do exist, the codes that do exist have not been as strongly enforced, and then there are areas that they've not gone far enough, in our opinion. It's just that this used to be a rural part of the state. You didn't really need as many opportunities for county authority, for city authority in the floodplains and in hydrologically sensitive areas because people didn't live there, or the people that did had been there for generations and knew their risk. Our region, like Ben said, is one of the fastest growing regions, if not the fastest growing region in the state and the country. And a lot of people moving here don't know what flash flood alley means. They don't know the risk of living here. And the county officials are very limited in their ability to prepare and respond for these events just due to how state law is set up. So it's kind of counties, cities, the entire region, the state is playing catch up to the growth that we have seen and to the changing precipitation events and how intense they are. And so we may continue to play catch up, but we feel that there's opportunities now to ensure that we're better positioned going forward for these types of events.
I just want to say that the first thing you've got to do is to get the citizens to be supportive. I live in Comfort, Texas. 3 years ago, we did a flood book about what happened to people in '78. That got everybody coalesced together, and from there, we had no problem getting what we needed. We are unincorporated, and in spite of that, we went to the people who would help us at
That's a very good point. I think we can all benefit from the example of what Comfort did with their sirens. I know Comal County has a really good siren system. New Braunfels, San Marcos, these places that have grown a little faster and dealt with these floods. That's certainly something, again, having Texans speak to their state, county, and city officials to talk about the impacts, to talk about what they want, to make sure that they're protected and that anyone who's moving in is also protected will be vitally important in this special session starting on Monday for the next 30 days and for the 90th legislative session starting in 2027. We can't let this happen again, and so we need to speak to the people who are on the ground to learn from the examples and the success stories that y'all have had in protecting your fellow neighbors and to make sure that your new neighbors learn the same things.
Any other questions? All right, seeing none. We'll stick around for a little bit of Q&A if you all want to talk to us afterwards, but thank you all for being here today. If anybody has not already gathered a whole lot of B-roll from this event, this horrible storm water and flood event, Pam Hodges over there in the green hat is willing to lead a group of people down to where they can take some B-roll of the river, but I'm sure you all have gathered plenty to date. So thank you all, we appreciate it. Please help us get the word out. We're doing this really from the place of caring for others. We love the Hill Country, we love the people in it, and we do not want to see people harmed again.